The only context you need for this video is that there's no positional value factored in, and everybody had to play at least 500 snaps, unless they were at like 495, in which case I would make an exception. With that out of the way, let's start with the Cleveland Browns. Jerome Ford is going to be their fifth best player. He had a really good stat in his favor in that he was fifth in yards after contact per attempt. So that's really a nice stat that shows he was kind of making the most out of what he was given. His offensive line wasn't always giving him a lot of room, and teams were selling out to stop the run because they weren't very effective in passing. So he was definitely effective in that sense. He, I think, could have been better in a better situation. I mean, that's true for a lot of players, but he wasn't horrible. And that kind of made him stand out from a lot of the Browns players this year. Number 4, I think some of you are going to think is a little bit low, is Jerry Jeudy. Jeudy was 15th in yards per game for all players, so wide receivers, tight ends, what have you. He was basically the only guy that could catch for the Browns for much of the year because Amari Cooper, he got dealed at the trade deadline, or around there. I don't remember if it was exactly at the trade deadline, but it was roughly then. And Jeudy, he showed out. Even though he didn't have great quarterback play, he was certainly a solid option, and his stats reflect that. He definitely wasn't as favored by the advanced stats as he was the conventional ones, as he was 45th in yards per route run for wide receivers. So he was an above average wide receiver, but not, there's a great difference between being 15th and 45th. And I think a lot of it does have to do with the fact that, teams were able to sell out to stop him. So even if he's running his routes, in a crisp fashion, he still was going to get into coverage or, with Jameis being erratic, he wouldn't always see him or he wouldn't always put it on target. Those all held him back. But either way, he was 45th in yards per route run. So that's not, bad, but it holds him back just a little bit. So for number 3, we have Jordan Hicks. He is 13th in PFF coverage grade. So he's really strong in that department. He can really blow up passing plays as a whole, though, because he missed some time due to injury. I think he played about 12 games. So if he played as well as he did for those amount of games for the whole season, he would have been 10th in pressures for linebackers. So he would have been in, the top 15 for coverage and pressures. That's, something very few linebackers can say. So he would have been, just killing it in every front statistically. And another linebacker is number 2. And believe it or not, this was very surprising to me. It's Devin Bush. Yes, the bust for the Steelers that has not been able to find a home in the NFL is the second best player for an NFL team. Devin Bush, he kind of showed what he is made of because he still is very athletic. I say that like he's like 40. He's, mid 20s, but he's really athletic. He's very physical, even though he's not like the biggest. And he is really solid across the board. He was PFF's 9th best linebacker that played 20% or more of snaps. He was 13th lowest in missed tackle percentage for linebackers. So that's really sound stuff. I say he's well rounded. He is, but he's not the greatest in coverage. He definitely is more of a run stuffing, like just tackle machine type of linebacker than he is. Somebody that can race tight ends or running backs or, go with receivers. But there's still value in a guy that can just, really help in the run support. So Bush is the number 2 player. And number 1 is, believe it or not, Myles Garrett. He is just one of the best players in the league as a whole. I feel like I don't really need to get too in depth with his stats, but just in case you didn't know, he was tied for first in pressures for edge rushers, and he was 10th in stops. If you don't know what stops are, it's a great stat. It basically says, did you make a tackle that was effective for your defense? Meaning, did you stop a guy on 1st and 10 for a 2-yard gain? That's a stop. Did you stop a guy on 3rd and 15 for a 3-yard gain? That's a stop. Those are, plays that are in favor of what the defense wants. So it's a very impactful stat. And Garrett was 10th in it. So he was getting after the quarterback and stopping the run at a high level. So that's why he's the number 1 guy. And for the next team, we have the Bengals. Mike Hilton was 2nd in stops for cornerbacks. And I love this. He played 360 less snaps than the guy that was number 1 in stops. So Hilton definitely could have been number 1 in that stat. He just wasn't given enough playing time. And I think that perfectly illustrates the type of player that Mike Hilton is. Hilton is very good against the run for a cornerback. He's kind of the prototypical nickel defender in that sense. He's really, really physical. Even though he's like 5'9", he is great at going through blocks and, fighting through them. He's also great at tackling. He's a good blitzer as well for a corner. So he supplies some weird value for the team, but hey, I'll take it. And the next thing about him is he's PFF's 14th best cornerback as a whole. A good chunk of that is because they do respect his run defense prowess and blitzing abilities. But either way, he is more than good enough as a coverage guy as well. I think he was like maybe in the 30s for cornerbacks in coverage. So, you can definitely work with that. Number 4 is going to be T. Higgins, who would be the number 1 player for a lot of teams, or at least the number 1 wide receiver. He is kind of reminiscent of Mike Williams at his best, I would say. He is super good at winning deep downfield. He is about 6'4", I want to say. He's a great jump ball receiver. Basically, everybody is not tall enough, strong enough. So he's very tough to go against for a variety of reasons. And analytically, it's super important to be a deep downfield winner. It's been shown that that's the most efficient offense to play. And Higgins, like I said, that's what he specializes in. So even if he doesn't have maybe the most well-rounded game, it's not like he's bad in the short to intermediate parts of the field. It's just the Bengals have focused on him deep downfield, and I think they're right for doing that. So you don't always see, him winning like on slants or like curl routes. He can do it. It's just, why do that when you can get a 30-yard bomb? So Higgins, he's 10th in yards per game for all players and 28th in yards per route run, all of which, or both of which, is really solid, especially because he was behind maybe the best receiver in the league this year. I don't want to say definitively because receiver is a position that is really, really stacked, but and that's kind of something that like makes Higgins, I think, fall out of favor in some people's eyes. Like they're like, whatever, he's not that good. He's not Justin Jefferson or, Nico Collins. Yeah, he's not, but he's still better than, 10 teams number one wide receiver. I don't know if that's true. I'm just kind of estimating. So he's great. And number 3 is a guy that would be number 1 for a lot of teams in Trey Hendrickson. He had an absolutely dominant season. He was incredible as a sack getter. He had 18. The guy with second most in the league had 15. So Hendrickson had 17% more than the second place player did for sacks. Hendrickson, likewise, was first in pressures. So both the analytical minds and the more conventional viewers can agree. The more conventional ones love sacks, the more analytical ones love pressures. He was first in both. And he's also not bad in run defense. So it's really hard to say, anything negative about this guy. He hasn't always been the best in run defense, but this year he was legitimately good. And number 2 was Jamar Chase. And I feel so bad for saying that because Chase, like I said, he may be the best receiver in the league. So, you think that guarantees that you're the best player on your team. Chase had 17 touchdowns, which is absurd because the person in second had 13. So he had 4 more touchdowns than the next closest guy. That's crazy. Chase was also first in yards per game. So I don't know what you could do as a knock on him. The metric had Burrow as, this is a weird metric, so if you don't understand the numbers entirely, that's fine. It had Burrow as a 64 and Chase as a 62. So it was quite close. And with that said, I was, torn if I should, reevaluate it. Either way, I mean, being second isn't, a bad thing. So number 1 is Joe Burrow. I thought he was in a super impactful year this year because last year was not great. He wasn't bad, but there's a big difference between being, one of the 3 to 5 best quarterbacks in the league and being average to a little bit below average, which he was last year. So I was like, what is he going to do? Is he going to bounce back? Is the injury, is that something that's lingering? No. He puts together one of the best seasons a quarterback has ever had. And he got, I think, outshined a little bit by some of the other great quarterback performances because those other great quarterbacks had teams that were good enough to support him and, win games as a result. Burrow did not have a team that could support him, aside from Chase, Higgins, Hendrickson, etc. It was, I mean, that's basically the whole team. You got Hilton and a couple other guys, but, it was basically 7 guys. So Burrow, I think, doesn't get talked about nearly as much as he should. And he gets talked about a lot. So that's what's so telling about how good he was. The fact that I'm going to tell you, no, this year was really special. And advanced stat wise, which I am more, in favor of and accustomed to using, they really liked him. And the conventional stats, they loved him. So it was a great marriage of sorts. Burrow, I know I said Chase was first in those key stats, but it's not 1-to-1. Even though I'm not doing positional value, there's, being the best receiver, even though it's a very competitive position, isn't necessarily better than being maybe the second best quarterback. Who knows where I'm ranking Burrow overall. So there's, going to be some weird stuff with it where, Burrow in this case was second in success rate, which looks at if you were, on 1st and 10, a 5-yard gain might be successful. If you're 3rd and 20, a 5-yard gain is not going to be successful. So it just quantifies what every play is doing for your team. And if you have, any more interest in learning about it, I have videos that break them down, so you can check that out. In addition to being second in success rate, Burrow was also second in PFF grade for quarterbacks. He was absolutely incredible. I mean, this is another one. Roughly speaking, because I don't have the whole list in front of me, but I do know that Jordan Mailata was number 1, Lamar Jackson was number 2, and then I believe Joe Burrow was number 3 for PFF grades. That's kind of hard to argue against, to say that he's not the best player on his team. I feel like I've talked way too much about the, ins and outs of who's number 1, who's number 2, whatnot, but I think it's very interesting because they do play off each other and they're both, arguably the best at their position. So, with that said, we're going to finally get to the number 2 team in the division, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And we're going to start off with George Pickens, who is just going to be completely in a rage over his ranking when he finds out, because he watches my videos. I'm just kidding. He doesn't. Pickens is 14th in yards per reception for all players. So that's really solid. What's not quite as solid is the fact that he's 25th in yards per route run. So the advanced stats, or the advanced stat in this case, not as on board with him. The conventional one, it does have, some liking of him. Overall, I think he's closer, to be honest, to 14 than he is 25. I think a lot of his just lacking production relative to some of the other really, really good receivers in the league, I think that's in large part due to the fact that it's Pickens and Freiermuth and then Washington as well. So, you got 2 tight ends. Washington's not the most advanced route runner. Freiermuth is pretty darn good, but not he's not Kelsey in his prime. So it's kind of easy to stop the Steelers on offense, and especially when the first 2 plays are guaranteed to be runs. So then the other team's like, okay, let's stop the run, and then get them into a 3rd and 10 where they have to throw a streak to Pickens. That's kind of hard to be effective in that situation. So I understand why Pickens doesn't have the same numbers, but at the end of the day, I wanted to use his ranking and percentiles in the league as placement for him, just like anybody else. I didn't want to skew the data any. So even though I think he's a little bit better in ranking than the 5th best Steeler, I think that there's merit to him being ranked there. Number 4 is a surprise pick in Elandon Roberts, who was a run defense specialist for the linebacking unit. He was special at it. I'm talking maybe the best run defending linebacker in the league. There would be plays where he would just run through the A gap or the B gap, and he would just tear the running back's head off. He is electric in that sense. I will admit, he's definitely not a coverage guy. I think this was one of his better coverage years, and he was still probably below average. And that's fine. Obviously, it'd be much better if he was well-rounded, but if you're going to supply value, being maybe the best in the league at something, you have a spot on the team for sure. He was, according to PFF, the 3rd best run defending linebacker in the league. And this is not going to sound as impressive, but it's to me really impressive. He was 28th in pressures, even though he rushed roughly half as much as every player above him. So he still would have been, the lead linebacker on a bunch of teams in, pressures, and he's doing it half as much as everybody else. That's kind of crazy. And that really speaks to just how effective he is in his role. I think that, he could start. I wouldn't love it, but if you play him in a very specific situation, like with Peyton Wilson, who is great in coverage, you can offset the deficiencies of each player because Wilson's not great in the run game yet. I think he's going to develop, but for the time being, Landon Roberts, he can be the thumper, and Peyton Wilson, he can take on the tight ends, take on the running backs, cover receivers with some effectiveness, and I think you wouldn't notice, the issues. So Roberts is great in his role, and it's very, niche, but he's really good at it. At number 3, we have another defender. As you could probably imagine, the Steelers don't really have offensive players, and it's Alex Highsmith. He was an underrated player this year because he was just in a rotation that had so much talent that, it's kind of easy to neglect the attention to the second best guy. But when he is, on the field with Watt and the others, they can really do some damage. Highsmith, he was 7th in PFF's best edge grade. So, he'd be the number 1 edge for basically everybody. He also was 5th in stops if he would have played the whole year at the same level he was playing at. He missed about 5 games. So he is incredibly talented. He is so good against the run, but he's also just really gotten the hang of the whole pass rushing thing. He's not super athletic, but he's not unathletic either. And he really just presents a huge problem because he's such a balanced player that has such a great motor that, he's going to be stopping the run one play, then he's going to be getting after the quarterback the next, and he's not going to slow down at any point. So he's very good all around. And somebody else who's very good all around is this guy, TJ Watt. He didn't have his best year this season, that's for sure. But, an off year for him is still being the second best player for the Steelers. Watt was 5th in stops for edge rushers and 7th in sacks. He didn't get a lot of pressures though, and that's what really stands out to me. He was in the 20s for pressures amongst edge rushers. That's obviously still good, but we're used to seeing Watt in the top 5. So to be in the 20s is a pretty stark contrast, but he was still super, super effective in the run game. As I mentioned, the stops, that shows he's making tackles in the backfield. He's making tackles right at the line of scrimmage. He's getting, some sacks. He was doing it in a lot of ways. I think he sometimes gets overly criticized by Steelers fans because they, think he could be doing more. This year, maybe, but at the same time, it's kind of hard to say, you're helping the defense be really good and you have a floundering offense, as an edge rusher do more. What is he supposed to do? I don't know. Number 1, though, for the Steelers is Cam Hayward. I don't know if this is a surprise to any of you, but Hayward, man, he had a year this year. I would say he was pretty far and away the best defensive tackle in this season. He was top 5 in pressures, sacks, and stops, 4 defensive tackles. And, that's something that just doesn't get done. You're either really good as a pass rusher or as a run stuffer, and then you're, good as, something else. And with Hayward, that's just not the case. He also plays not, to the effect that Watt does, because Watt plays basically every single snap, but Hayward, he's out on the field a lot. And, you'll see him making plays, on the occasion that like a 30-yard run breaks off. You'll see him running with the running back 30 yards downfield. And, he'll sometimes get the tackle. It's hilarious. There should be like highlight reels of just that. Like, here's 10 minutes of Cam Hayward chasing down players that are 100 pounds lighter than him. It's very funny to me. It might not be funny to you, but it's funny to me. And now we move to the number 1 team in the division, the Baltimore Ravens. So we have, to start off, Zay Flowers as their 5th best player. He was 16th in yards per route run, so that's really solid for a 5th, best player to be one of the, upper echelon receivers in the league. He also was 25th in yards per reception. He is, I think, much more than a lot of us expected. I thought he was going to be good, but I didn't think he was going to be like this outside receiving, can go deep, can go intermediate, do everything. I don't really know exactly what his splits are for like route distribution, but just from what I've watched, I've seen him do everything a good deal. I wasn't expecting that. I thought he was going to be, definitely more than a gadget guy, but I thought you wouldn't see him running like post routes because dude's like 5'8". So, it's just, you seem a bit limited at that height. You would never know it, unless you see him by another player that's taller than him. Because like the way he plays, he plays like a big boy. And someone else who plays like a big boy is our number 4 player for the Ravens, and Marlon Humphrey. This is insane. He's the 4th best player as well, I might add. He was PFF's 3rd ranked cornerback in coverage, and he was the 9th best cornerback in man per PFF as well. That's ridiculous. This is the 4th best player on the team. And, again, he's going to be the starter for, 2/3 of the league. Or, the number 1 starter, if I didn't say. I may have just said the starter. That's not what I meant. That's bonkers. Humphrey is maybe the most versatile corner in the league. I would say it's probably him, because he's been an outside corner for basically his whole career. And then this year it's like, hey, Marlon, do you want to play slot? He's like, yeah, I'll do it. I'll clamp up some slot receivers. He is so talented. He's great in the slot. He's great outside. He is a great tackler. He can blitz. He does it all. And he reminds me a lot of the next player for the Ravens, in Kyle Hamilton. Hamilton and Humphrey, they're pretty different in like their archetype builds, because Hamilton is like 6'4" and Humphrey is 6 foot. So, they're both tall, but Humphrey ran like a 4.4, I want to say, in the 40-yard dash, and Hamilton ran like maybe like a 4.6. Definitely wasn't fast. So they're not similar in that regard, but their versatility is very similar. Hamilton also has played in the nickel, so they overlap a little bit in that regard. Hamilton, I feel disgusted putting him at 3 as well. because he's PFF's second best safety overall. So that's free safeties, strong safeties, you name it. I say you name it. Those are the two. Anyways, he's fourth in stops for safeties. So again, he's playing, the run really well. He's making tackles and coverage that stop the offense from getting what they want. He's playing elite coverage as well, just like, as evident by him being the second rated safety. This year, he was playing a little bit more nickel early on, I believe. And then he was doing well at it. Like, he himself wasn't doing poorly, but the defense wasn't doing well as a whole. And then, partway through the season, he gets moved to deep safety. And he just plays incredibly. Like, it's so incredible that he can play two completely different positions and excel at both of them. It's the same thing with Humphrey. Like, I don't want to, if I didn't give enough love to Humphrey, like, he's playing two completely different positions, outside and inside corner. Hamilton, he's, playing nickel corner, he's playing safety. There'd be times where he's kind of like a linebacker. There's, you name it. Like, he's probably done it this year. So he is a great answer to the chess pieces on offense, where like tight ends are like running, or wide receivers, and wide receivers are like tight ends and whatnot. He's the great answer to that. Someone else on the Ravens that I feel bad for having placed where they are is number 2, Derrick Henry. Oh my goodness. He is a just complete wonder. He forced 80 missed tackles this year. Do you want to guess how many the second most missed tackles was for a running back? Again, Henry's got 80. Second most had 70. He was first in yards per attempt as well, which is funny. He was 0.1 yards per attempt greater than Barkley, I believe. It was 5.8 versus 5.9. And Henry, he definitely has a player on, the offense that helps him in Lamar Jackson. But at the same time, the Ravens' offensive line, it's pretty good, but it's not the Eagles' offensive line, that's for sure. And, Henry was getting it done. So that's, all I can say. Like, he's so physical. Like, he'll throw you to the ground. He doesn't care if you're a linebacker or safety, whatever. He has still got the speed for long runs. He's incredible. And number 1, if you couldn't tell, I feel like he would have been the betting favorite for number 1, is Lamar Jackson. There's good reason to expect him to be number 1. He was first in PFF grade and first in quarterback rating for quarterbacks, of course. So, and he was, I think, second overall, as I mentioned before. He's either second or third. And I'm pretty sure he's second in all players in PFF grade. The guy's pretty good, He's definitely not bad for a running back, to bring that annoying saying back. He's not going to get, I think, as much love from people this offseason as he should for the season that he's had, because it didn't result in a Super Bowl. And to an extent, I can understand and appreciate that. But also, he was first in like 2 of the most key stats in evaluating quarterbacks. It's kind of hard to say, he wasn't, at the top of his game. I don't need to get like too in depth with it, because I'm going to do a video on ranking the quarterbacks. But just know he's, I'd say, still the fastest quarterback in the league. He's got one of the better arms. He can make every pass. He's fantastic. It's as simple as that. those are my thoughts on the best players in the AFC North. Be sure to let me know what yours are in the comment section. Also, be sure to like and subscribe for more football content.